Grammar instruction in communicative teaching classrooms, student-teacher's perception. Introduction. Grammar is the language, framework, and system of meaning. Every language seems to have a grammar, and persons speaking in a similar language will communicate because they naturally understand the grammar structure, which is the rules of meaning. Language without grammar is going to be messy, and it is harder to understand language without looking for this basic framework. So, grammar language will be impossible to learn effectively without following structural rules. They found that grammar plays a very important role in the study of language. The purpose of grammar is to educate those who use English to express their thought properly, both in speaking and writing. Grammar is as an essential and inseparable part in language teaching. So, teachers have tended to use communicative activities in teaching grammar instructions in. It is meant that in teaching English as a foreign language, it is necessary to consider not only how learners acquire grammatical competence, but also how they learn to communicate. That is, how they develop communication competence. In the importance of teaching English grammar as a foreign language, various methods and approaches have been applied to enhance learner competence. 6 approaches that have a significant impact on grammar instruction, including grammar translation method, direct method, audiolingual method, cognitive approach, natural approach, and communicative approach. Among them, the communicative approach, commonly called CLT, is one of the current trends of language teaching. The main intention of CLT is designed to teach communicative competence, which involves parts of speech and tenses as a sentence construction. A teaching technique that refers to several aspects of language, include the use of language for multiple purposes and functions, distinguish between formal and informal oral and written discourse. Using CLT to teach grammar in the second language classroom is an effort to improve students' attitude towards language learning and to have positive effect on their learning process. Emphasis placed on grammatical mistakes and fear of making grammar error has a negative impact on students. Those are related to the findings of a study conducted by Nurfakhara in 2017. On a study, he revealed that students feel bored when learning English grammar because it made them confused and lazy to learn. Further, Wilkins in 1973, the one who providing Europe with a standardized program for foreign language teaching, proposed a national syllabus which did not organize the syllabus in terms of grammatical structure, but rather define in what learners needed to interact with each other. It means the focus of CLT is language learning through communication, not through mechanical presentation of grammatical form. The use of CLT in teaching grammar in the second language classrooms is a means of changing the attitude of the students towards language learning and positively influencing their way of learning. CLT approach that the key principle of CLT approach that can be summarized as follows is communicative competence is the primary goal. Authentic materials are used to encourage students to use the language. The language learning is learned by trial and error. Student mostly works in pair and small groups. Grammar is best learned through the process of communication. Teachers have a role as facilitator and monitor, and students, as a negotiator, are individually responsible to make themselves understand and be understood in the process of communication. The changing of teaching culture from teacher-centered to student-centered caused by the CLT approach also brought a change the concept in how to teach. Moreover, there are two primary kinds of approaches to teaching grammar in CLT: the shallow end approach and the deep end approach. The shallow end approach is taught grammar in a way that we can define as inductive, or it calls as consciousness raising. The latter, the deep end approach to CLT, concerns the implicit learning of grammar in communicative context without any previous and explicit teaching. So, teaching grammar is communicatively means help students get used to the rule and patterns in context, either consciously or unconsciously, by paying attention to student needs. Also, the application, whether the teacher chooses to teaching grammar in explicit or implicit ways, it will depend on teacher perception and knowledge. The adoption of CLT in Indonesia language teaching curriculum has gone through several changes and development. The latest curriculum in Indonesia, which usually called as Curriculum 2013 or K13, adopt CLT approach into its implementation. Not only that, the popularity of CLT keeps increasing as many teachers apply the concept of CLT in their classroom. From some previous related studies on learning English anxiety, a research study was conducted to find out student teachers' perception in teaching grammar instruction in communicative language teaching classroom. Literature review. The concept of communicative language teaching. So, communicative language teaching, or CLT, is one of the approach to language teaching. The approach was found from the awareness that language as a system for communication, not just a set of the rules. It switched the emphasis of traditional language teaching to grammar and teacher-centered classes to the active use of authentic language in learning and acquisition. CLT is an approach that emphasizes communicative ability. Furthermore, CLT describes as a set of general principles grounded in the notion of communicative competence as the goal of second and foreign language teaching, a new approach that has evolved as our understanding of the processes of second language learning has developed. From the definition above, it can be concluded that communication language teaching, or CLT, is a language teaching that emphasizes interaction as concept of means and final aim of language learning. Role of student teachers and grammar's instruction in CLT. Communicative language teaching emphasizes on self-direction for students. Teachers no longer rely on activities that involve repetition, accuracy, and the memorization of sentences. They require students to communicate in context and communicate meaningfully in foreign language. This is important for active development of a new language. The role of learners in CLT as a delegate towards themselves, the process of learning, and objective of learning, emerging from and interacting in the role of the negotiator, both in groups and in classroom activities. Communicative activities plays an important role in teaching communicative language. In a communicative competence, there are several approaches that help students involve learners in communication. Types 2 main categories in communicative activities. There are functional communicative activities and social interaction activities. Approaches to teaching grammar have undergone many changes. These changes have characterized grammar teaching to move from a grammar-based approach to a communicative approach. Methodology: research design, participants, and local of the study. The study used intrinsic case study method as the way to collect the data. Case study is qualitative approach that involves the study about issue explored through one or more cases over time through detailed, in-depth data collection involving multiple sources of information. They use intrinsic case study because the study design was focused on the case itself. The case presents an unusual or unique situation. The study was conducted in Islamic Junior High School Palembang, and they choose English teachers and students of the 9th grades at MTSN to Palembang by using purposeful sampling technique. The aim of purposeful sampling was to choose the individual that could provide the information-rich and the most detailed information to help researchers answer the research questions. Data collection and analysis. In this research, in order to find out the teachers' and students' perception in grammar instruction, in communicative language teaching or CLT, they used interview in order to gain information about teachers' and students' perception towards grammar instruction in communicative language teaching classroom. To analyze the data of teachers and students' perception towards grammar instruction in communicative language teaching classroom, the data from interview were analyzed to determine information about teachers and students' perception toward grammar instruction in communicative language teaching classroom. After they collected the data, they analyzed the data by using thematic analysis. In this research, they used trustworthiness to evaluate qualitative data analysis to make sure that the findings were credible. Findings. The data gained from interviews were analyzed by using thematic analysis. The description of the finding were explained as follows. Teachers' perception. After analyzing the data from interview, they found that there was some teachers' perception towards grammar instruction in communicative language teaching. The importance of grammar. Based on the data obtained from the interviews, they got some teachers' perception about grammar instruction in communicative language teaching. They found that most of the teachers agreed that the grammar was a crucial component in improving students' skills in CLT classroom. It was because grammar was very helpful for students in improving English language. Classroom activities. Based on the data obtained from interview, it was found that some perception toward grammar instruction in communicative language teaching. They found that most of the teachers agreed that in learning process group work or pair works was designed to promote communication in the classroom. However, all the teachers also perceived that in applying group works, students were able to interact well. Quality and quantity of error correction. Based on the data obtained from the interview, they found that most of the teachers agreed that error correction was one of process to create students in mastering materials. However, the teachers also did not feel angry when students made a grammatical error. The data obtained from the interview also showed that most teachers believed that correction and errors or mistakes was an obligation for teachers. Therefore, the teachers should give the immediate correction feedback for students. The role of a teacher in classroom. The data obtained from interview showed that in teaching grammar instruction in communicative language teaching, teachers act as a motivator in the teaching learning process. However, they also found that most of teachers trained the students to take responsibility and self-discipline to develop their activities. The role and contribution of students in the learning process. The data obtained from the interviews also revealed that teaching grammar instruction in CLT classroom should be balanced. In teaching English between tasks and activities must be balanced. Also, in teaching English language, students should not only mastering the theory but also practicing the theory. The students' perception towards grammar instruction in communicative language teaching. After analyzing the data from interview, they found that there was some students' perception towards grammar instruction in communicative language learning. The importance of grammar. Based on the data obtained from the interviews, they found that some students' perception about grammar instruction in CLT classroom. They found that most of students considered grammar as an important part in learning language. Classroom activities. Based on the data obtained from the interview, it was found that some perception toward grammar instruction in CLT teaching and learning process. They found that most of the students agreed that using group made it faster and appropriate way to develop knowledge quickly. Quality and quantity of error correction. Based on the data obtained from the interview, they found that most of students agreed that by correcting an error has been considered helpful in achieving successful and communicative competence. However, the students also did not feel bad when their teachers corrected their mistakes. The role of teacher in classroom. The data obtained from interview found some student perception toward the roles of teacher in teaching grammar instruction in CLT classroom. Students argued that the role of teachers in the classroom are as an independent within the learning teaching group, gave motivation to students, and the teachers facilitate all students' need. The role and contribution of students in the learning process. The data gotten from the interviews also revealed that the role of and contribution of students in the learning process. The students perceived that the students should take part in the process of learning. In addition, students also argued that the role of and contribution of students in the learning is as receiver the lesson. Discussion. After analyzing the data by using a thematic analysis, it was found that there was several information about teachers and student perception toward grammar instruction in CLT classrooms. There is considered of A. The importance of grammar, B. Classroom activities, C. Quality and quantity of error correction, D. The role of teacher in classroom, E. The role and contribution of students in the learning process, and therefore the explanation of the factors was described as following in order to know more information about them. The first was the importance of grammar. Most of teachers and students perceived that grammar was important in learning English language. It was because grammar was very helpful for students in improving English language. However, the students also considered grammar as an important part in learning English language. The findings is supported by Mirazna and Hikmah in 2019 in their study. They revealed that students were aware of the importance of grammar. They assumed that by learning grammar, they can measure their English abilities. The second was classroom activities. It was designed to develop fluency, enhance classroom interaction, and increase motivation. The finding indicated that most of the teachers agreed that in the learning process, group work or pair work was designed to promote communication in the classroom. So, the teachers had to provide their learners with opportunities to engage in meaningful interaction. The third is quality and quantity of error correction. The teachers used this to convey message to the students that their contribution were unacceptable or incorrect and that they should consider or clarify them. The findings indicated that most of teachers agreed that error correction was one of process to create students in mastering materials. The teachers also stated that correction and errors or mistakes was an obligation for teachers. The data obtained from interviews also showed that most of students agreed that by correcting an error has been considered helpful in achieving successful communicative competence. The fourth was the role of teachers in classroom. In teaching grammar, instruction, and communicative language, teaching teachers act as motivator in the teaching learning process. It was also found that most of the teachers trained the students to take responsibility and self-discipline to develop their activities. The students perceived that the role of teachers in the classroom are as an independent within the learning teaching group, gave motivation to students, and the teachers facilitate all student needs. The fifth was the role of and contribution of students in the learning process. The results showed that teaching grammar instruction in CLT classroom should be balanced. In teaching English, between tasks and activities must be balanced. Also, in teaching English language, students should not only mastering the theory but also practicing the theory. Conclusion. Based on the data analyzed by using thematic analysis, it was found teachers' and students' perception toward grammar instruction in communicative language teaching. The first, teachers' perception in teaching grammar instruction in communicative in CLT classroom. The teachers think that provide students with explicit explanation was an effective way to teach grammar instruction in CLT classroom. Second, in the learning process, teachers using group and pair works was designed to promote communication in CLT classroom. Third, teachers claimed that in learning process, error correction was one of process students to mastering materials. So, correcting mistake was an obligation for teachers. Fourth, the teachers perceive they should act as motivator in the teaching learning process and training students to take responsibility and develop their activities. Fifth, in teaching grammar instruction in CLT classrooms, students should not only mastering the theory but also practicing the theory. The second, students' perception in learning grammar in communicative language teaching classroom. Students considered grammar as an important part in learning English, so they need to know and learning grammar. Students claim that learning grammar in CLT with group activities help them to learn and practice comfortably. In learning, students' error has been considered helpful in achieving successful communicative competence, so students did not felt bad when the teachers corrected their mistakes. Students perceived in learning process teachers should motivate students to more practice in using English language and explain materials interestingly. Students argued that they should take in part on the process of learning and following the learning process well. This research only focused to find out the teachers' and students' perception in grammar instruction and communicative language teaching because the limitation of time. By knowing the teachers' and students' perception in teaching and learning grammar instruction in communicative language teaching because the limitation of time, they expected students to consider grammar as an important part in learning English language. So, this study can inspire students to increase their interest in learning grammar in CLT classroom. Thank you.